I'll record it.
Yeah.
I'm like, so a scene. We talk about them a lot. I think most of you have a pretty strong sense of what they are, but if not, just to revisit, scene is that unit of contained action, meaning it takes place in a time or a place, usually both. Occasionally it's taking place in something that is moving across spaces, like a train, a plane, or a car. So the key is that it's you've got one sort of specific goal for the action. It takes place in one place and time. It's also where you engage in what I call demonstration of action versus telling, right? Versus lecture versus summary. And you're breaking down the plot into these manageable bits so that each, you've got an overarching plot umbrella, but in every scene is where your characters have to act out goals along the way to that journey. Characters use words and deeds. So they speak and they act more than they reflect and think to communicate information and move the story along. And when either you or the reader gives you feedback that they are feeling bored, impatient, glazed over something, you've probably dropped out of scene and into summary of some kind. And summary in the middle of a scene, like especially if it goes on for too long, really pulls us out of the energy and the action of the scene. So you might get readers saying something along those lines. Just a real quick refresher of the ingredients of a scene. This is like a lot of ingredients. Like if you just get the basics, you've got a main character present with a goal, they're out to do something. You've got momentum or action, so they're moving through space and time, engaging in those words and deeds. You've got setting details that we see as they interact with it, and you have new plot information. If you have those four things, you've got the base, more than enough to carry a scene. But of course, you're also going to want to think about things like sensory imagery, which is how you communicate emotion using the body. And of course, the four elements of tension that we've talked about is danger, conflict, uncertainty, and withholding. As much as you can get one or more of those elements present in a scene, the more likely it is to have the kind of tension that keeps a reader's interest. So often what happens is we take our characters on little vignettes or anecdotes into some part of their life. Nothing wrong with that. That's how we get to know them. But what can happen is if to the reader, there's no sense of the point of the scene, why is this happening? Then they can often feel bored just because it doesn't seem to be leading them deeper into the story you're trying to tell. So that's something I find we do when we're still trying to figure out the story as writers. We tell ourselves, we kind of test drive our character in these different scenarios. And then some of them work and some of them don't. And sometimes we have to beef them up with a goal or a purpose. Beginning scenes. So, right from the get-go, launching a scene, you have the potential to make to hook or lose a reader's attention, right? So I'm a fan as often as is possible and as realistic of beginning a scene with, if not an entrance into action coming pretty quickly after the scene opens. So there might be a moment of reflection, and then we kind of get into what's happening in the scene. And I've noticed this over the course of this class. You guys give each other the feedback of where you lost interest, where you gained interest. And a lot of times it's, where the summary takes over instead of the scene. And you want to kind of give the reader a sense as quickly as possible of the character's goal in the scene. So which shouldn't take us paragraphs upon paragraphs upon paragraphs to figure out where this scene is going or what the character is after or what they want or what they're doing. If we kind of are waiting for something to happen, that's a sign that you don't have enough tension at the beginning of the scene, that we're just kind of like, okay, get to the point. And then of course that scene in general, not just the launch, but that scene has to build to some kind of what I call a high point. That's a term that to me reflects kind of the energy of a scene. And that doesn't necessarily mean any particular kind of energy. It could be conflict. It could be epiphany. It could be discovery. Character, deepens it gets a clue. It could be characters coming together, or even like Sochi in your story, when the characters have the sexual tension, that can act as a high point where suddenly the energy changes between two characters in their relationship. Something where the reader goes, oh, okay, this is what the scene is building toward. And sometimes it's also like a key piece of information to the plot. Additionally, you never want your scenes, I think we've talked about this, you never want your scenes to end in a place too satisfying so that the reader says, oh, yeah, sure, I'm done. Don't need to keep picking that up. You want the reader to constantly feel like they can't put your book down because there's something happening. And whether that's action or that's tension, it doesn't, always have to be one or the other. And when you do end scenes, you want to end them in such a way where there is a feeling of something unresolved, something left to come, nothing is tied up in a neat little bow. And Sochi, I think you do a really nice job of leaving. You even have a really good mastery of like the final line. Like you just do these great lines where I'm like, oh, I got to read the next one. So let's do a quick scene launch exercise. And ideal if it's a scene you haven't yet written or you're working on, but if you want to try rewriting a scene launch that you know is too slow or in summary or in reflection. So I want you to write a scene launch in which your character starts off in some kind of action. And I want you to give them a goal that you can communicate to the reader pretty quickly. So let us know within the first couple paragraphs what they're out to do. Again, just focus on what they're doing, how they're physically moving through space and time, and also think about what is their goal in this scene and how can I communicate that. If you don't get that far, you don't get the goal evident in the time we write, that's okay. Just try to see if you can get them doing something. And it can be a big moment in your story or it can be a small moment. It's really up to you. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. I'm going to also mute us all. Take another minute and wrap it up. Oh, this whole time I thought I was telling you that you had a minute left, and I was talking to myself because I was muted. And now you have 30 seconds left. And wrap up your thought. Put that last few words on paper. And really, for real now. Last word, last sentence. Okay. I'd love to hear what you wrote. If someone wants to volunteer to go first. Sochi?
So first of all, I love your exercises because they really help me think scenes through that I get stuck on. And when I wrote, there's places where I didn't finish the thought because I didn't have anything. So when Fassbender is driving Alex to her family's home, I really didn't say anything in there. It wasn't because that wasn't intentional. I just couldn't figure out what they would have said.
Yeah.
So
I get that.
So, but I have to write it, otherwise I'll forget a scene, and then I know I need to go back and fill in the empty. So this helped me. So this is their drive to her home. Like what they weren't driving in silence. So this is kind of something that helped me. Fassbender placed his hat on the center bench of the Jeep. He took great care in a uniform he was risking his life to destroy from its nucleus. It sat between us like a barrier larger than either of us could humanly bring down. So I picked it up. Fassbender's eyes momentarily broke from the road to catch what I was holding it. I inspected it by running my fingers across its glossy finish, not looking at Fassbender. I asked, "What does it make you feel when you wear this uniform?"
Nice. So you got yourself into the scene.
Yeah.
I like it. I know it's hard. Sometimes I do little notes to myself, like conversation will come later, because it's like, I just want to get to the parts I know I can write, come back to them later. Good work. All right. Who would like to read next?
I can go.
Yannicka?
Okay, so this is a scene, Jakob, it's probably in a chapter or two beyond where we were before, where Jakob's father's gangrene sore is beginning to get better, and there's little moments of spirit. And Jakob searched for wood, a large piece, tuning his eyes to flat, weathered, gray, brown, and somehow available. He paced countless meters beyond a soccer playing field to check. His eyes darted in a manner foreign to him. He still looked for the hey-hos and Japanese guards, but beyond that, he must find the wood, or maybe metal. This creation of his, it had come into existence to match the tunes in his head, the music that hadn't been there for so long. It had started with Papi, Mateus, and he whistling, and brought him back to when, in the first camp, Seba, his friend, painted a piano keyboard for him, and they practiced in turn, imagining the notes. Perhaps musicianship even developed after a gap of years because Jakob knew, he just knew, that he could whistle or hum and pretend play, and it would all come together. Wood was in shortage because they all needed a way to have clandestine fires. So he retuned his eyes on his plodding way back, discouraged, tuning his eyes to flashes of metal, drums, and more. At the communal cooking area near his own barrack, he saw the pieces of metal blackened by soot. He would have to hide, not just from the Japs, but the cooks too. These pieces protected the fires from gusts of wind and protected the men and boys doing the cooking. One piece had fallen down flat. It was not be missed. It was waiting for him. And so it became his and hot on his fingers, as hot as midday camp asphalt, and he felt a cut starting in the crease of his hand. A catastrophe, never get a cut. Puppy was just beginning to heal. It's good that this barrack was close, so he could walk quickly along the back, rush the metal past a few tired men who did not look up, and slide it underneath their threadbare bedding, where Poppy and Mateus, of course, would notice. Jakob liked crossing bridges one by one, first hiding the metal, then the explanations, then making his music, creating a new reality where maybe his companions all would have thought he'd had this piece of metal all along.
Nice. I'm impressed how much you wrote in that stretch of time.
Yeah, I was inspired. Your exercises are good.
Good job. Thank you. Who would like to go next? Nancy?
I can remind you. Is it on? Am I on?
Yeah.
It's short. I stood in the doorway and looked at Paul. He'd planted himself on the couch that morning and read Jung and wrote who knows what without moving off the sofa. Dishes filled the sink. The bed remained unmade. Smoke permeated house, curtains, and furniture. You have to get a job. You can't hang around the house anymore. Paul had graduated and gotten his PhD and finished his doctorate, but nothing marked the event, except he had his precious piece of paper, his diploma, that was supposed to be the miracle, which would make everything in their life to get their life together okay, and nothing happened. Everything was the same as it had been for the last 3 years, except that he hung around the house all day, all night, with plenty of debt and no job. I need to take a break, he said. I'm exhausted. I crossed the living room, dropped my purse on the dining table and faced him. You can't do nothing. You have to get a PhD. Now you have to work. You have your PhD. Now you have to work. You have until July. After July 1st, I'm not paying your child support anymore. You have 2 months to find something. Paul stared and he didn't respond.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good. And notice how dialogue feels like action. So sometimes, you don't have to have people doing big things in a scene. They can just be talking. It keeps that energy moving. Yeah. David or Susan? Susan and then David? Okay. Unmute. Susan, you need to unmute. You are on? It says you're muted on my end still. Nope. There we go. There we go.
Okay. Okay. So Artie and Malcolm raced into the room with a swirl of smoke behind them from the fire. There was a fire outside. I told them, Glory said, I told them she was dead. This is their mother. Mother's gone, is she? Malcolm said. I'm afraid so, Dr. Engelman said. How did you get here so fast? Artie asked. Mrs. Glass called me. Did you find her like that? Or did you get to talk to her, Artie? He asked me. I made one of those decisions I might regret, but it might break the case open. I lied. She did talk to me a little, then she lapsed into a coma. She'd been dead when I got there.
Oh.
Engelman glanced at me. Did he know I was lying? I think that's as far as I got.
Nice. I love how your work, there's just this I don't know, straightforward nature about the characters talking about things like a dead lady, lady lapsing from coma to death. I don't, and it's terrible, but it makes me laugh. But it's just like, there's something about no nonsense characters that sometimes can be a little funny, right? Like,
Well, this character wasn't too beloved anyway.
oh, okay, that's even better. So everyone's like, oh well, you know, it's her time.
Yeah.
Good. David?
Okay. I walk again on the wet sand of the shore, the scent of the salty sea, the cry of some kind of bird nesting in a cliff, and the crunch, the crusty wet sand suddenly giving no matter how carefully I step. Like the crunch in your voice, the last words I heard you speak. You say it was the man Bardiz whispering over your shoulder, but I heard the words in your voice. Should I still believe them? If they originated in another, how did you change what you heard? You must to have expelled the rancid words from that other mouthpiece. Was it truth told by you, from him, to my attentive ears? We loved making each other's words into a single soul abyss we fell into. Now I question the truth of my last memory of your voice. If I lose the truth now, I need another truth to replace it, or the longing will be lost to me.
Thank you. Beautiful as always. All right, so after you get that launch going, right, you know, you start the scene, hopefully hook the reader, and get that character underway, you have to make it a little, you have to complicate the scene or complicate it for the character, so to speak. And you can do this by throwing in obstacles as a point here. This is something that antagonists are useful for doing. They often throw down these obstacles and or make things harder on your character. But sometimes those complications come from within the characters in their character flaws, the things that hold them back, that cause them to stumble. Sometimes accidents take place, acts of nature, and even well-meaning people who do bad things. The reason you might draw upon any of those other items that are not antagonists is that it may not work for your plot for the antagonist to always be putting down the obstacles. But when you've got a scene going, you've got a character after a goal, if you just wrap it up and have them achieve what they're after too neatly, right? Again, we lose tension, we lose momentum. So you have to ask yourself, what are ways that I can make this harder on my protagonist that isn't completely arbitrary? So, you know, I'm a big fan of having characters trip themselves up by it could be anything. You know, maybe your character perpetually runs late, misses the opportunity for a job interview when they're about to, you know, be evicted from their apartment, things like that. Maybe it's, you know, a friend who thinks they're doing the right thing by telling your protagonist's husband some detail they shouldn't know. You know, it's all kinds of things can happen. But you want to think of it as you're working through your scene. I like to think of it as, you know, there has to be some kind of a trip in their step at some point. So it builds tension, it builds conflict, but it also pushes your character to be more resourceful. So when there is an interruption to the goal or the flow of their direction, then they have to think about, well, how else am I going to solve this problem? How else am I going to get the information I'm after? Whatever it is. Okay. So anytime you've got a scene where it's like, here's my character's goal, they went to achieve it, they achieved it, you're going to have readers feel a little bored, a little disinterested, anything like that, right? So we're going to do a complication exercise with that same scene launch you began. So you can, this complication can come later in the scene than you've actually written, but I want you to imagine that something goes wrong or challenges or it acts as an obstacle to your character in this scene. And if you can bring in one of these elements, danger, conflict, uncertainty, withholding, please do. Just write and sort of write your way into this obstacle. What happens? What does it look like? How does it affect your character internally as well? Do they have thoughts and feelings about it? Feel free to throw those in. While you write, I'm going to run to the restroom, but it'll only be about 5 or 6 minutes of a writing exercise. So take your minute to wrap up. Thirty seconds. And put that final sentence to bed. And what I want us to do when we go around, instead of reading it, I just want you to tell us, what is the complication that you added to your scene, if you can describe it. Just try to describe it in words. And who would like to try and do that first?
I'll go first.
David?
I was hoping there was a prize for the shortest free write ever. So what I came up with is my character all of a sudden walking in a desert, and there's no sound coming from this, or a very faint sound coming from the sand.
Mm.
And so without that prompting, the character can no longer hear any voices at all.
Oh, wow. And do we find out why?
No.
Eventually? I mean, eventually.
Yeah. I think I want to say the idea is that there needs to be some sort of sound that can be mistaken as a voice. Like sometimes when you hear a really faint sound and you think it's a voice, all of a sudden it's more vivid than if you don't.
That's true. Interesting. I like it. Cool. All right. Who else would like to share? Sochi?
Can't tell you how much these exercises help me, open my head.
Oh, good.
The scene that I didn't write in there, because I knew it was going to be, more too big for me to write and too much for me to read, was when she goes to visit her family. I'm like, who's going to open the door? The mom, the dad, just, I don't know who. So I'm thinking, so it just came to me. So this helped. So she's got this swagger, this coolness, this toughness, she's got going, to, press Fassbender or whatever. And so she kind of has a swagger getting out of the Jeep. I can see when the door opens and it's her father.
Mm.
And she freezes, and I can see her freezing, and suddenly all those layers just kind of fall off her. And he too, his eyes are watery, and he finally breaks his silence and calls her my baby, and his eyes water with her arms around. So she puts her, face into his shoulder and just kind of, and they hold each other. And then when she finally breaks and looks up over her shoulder, in the foyer of their home is Fritz standing there.
And who's Fritz again?
Fritz is the antagonist, the bitchy.
That's right. Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Great way to like hone in on a otherwise tender family moment.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Who else would like to go?
I'll go.
So
Right.
go ahead, Susan.
Susan and then Yannicka.
Basically, I had my detective keeps lying because she's trying to get some information from the son, and he gets really upset. And the doctor is about to give a death certificate, but he hasn't seen what the detective saw, which was that there's a needle mark on her neck. So she has to tell him that.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes a problem with the guy she's trying to get information from.
Oh, cool.
And the doctor says, I think maybe this is not going to get a death certificate yet.
Oh, nice. Excellent. All right, Yannicka.
So it's later in the same scene. Jakob, is beginning to cross those bridges, and to his surprise, his father is very hostile about it, calling him an idiot. It's so dangerous. Why would he do this? Does he never think? What's wrong with him? And at first, Jakob's going to give in, but he's so into owning this and the possibility of music that when he touches it, he decides to push back. And so it just keeps going.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And Nancy.
Well, I changed a little bit. So he gets up and, she says, you got to get a job. And so he, instead of let's see, what did I do here? And then she says, you can't do nothing. You have to you had your PhD. You have until July. I already read you that. And then Paul stares. You have, I can't. I took sheets from the closet. What are you doing? He asked. I'm moving into the front bedroom. I need to think. This is not working. Paul was behind me. What do you mean? I said, the waterbed is all yours. I carried the sheets and light blanket into the front room and said, leave me alone. I need quiet. And I shut the door in front of me.
I like that line. I said the waterbed is all yours. Like how many times do I have to say, how many different ways do I have to say I don't need you right now? That's great. I like it.
Fuck you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sorry.
Oh, please,
Glad
come on.
she's getting a backbone.
Yeah, she's getting a backbone.
Yeah,
and you can swear in this class. That's allowed. Remember, fuck guilt. Yannicka started it.
Yeah, fuck guilt. Okay, no guilt.
Right, that's why I didn't allow that 15-year-old child who wanted to take this class join. There's too much.
That 15-year-old child doesn't know that word. Seriously.
Well, I just didn't want her to know that we know that word.
Yeah. Certain things are fun.
Like wanted her to think adulthood is a land of innocence. Anyways, okay, so then let's talk about the high point of a scene. This, you know what? Well, I will talk about it, but I'm not going to probably have us do this exercise. So the complication happens, right? And then we start to, let me backtrack and say, again, the point of the complications and the obstacles is not just to make things hard for the sake of them being hard. It is, you're pushing your character toward an outcome related to their goal, and you're pushing them to become the person they need to become in order to achieve those goals. So obstacles actually toughen, strengthen, test, and kind of bring out of your character, ideally, the person that they are destined to become by the end of the story. So it's like you're putting them through their emotional gym class. That's what it is. So that's an important point about that. Then, so you're building to what I call the high point of a scene. And I know there's lots of different language and different writing teachers talk about these differently, but I like to think of it as a high point because it allows room for any kind of, when I say high, I mean higher in intensity, higher in conflict, higher in energy. It doesn't mean, I don't know what else that means, but so it could be an aha moment. Your character has an epiphany, discovers something, right? So really, this is the point at which the reader should be able to look back and say, this is what I learned from this scene. This is the point of this scene. It's what happens here in this high point. For some scenes, this high point happens kind of in the middle, and then there's a little more falling action. For some, it actually happens as the end of the scene. It's the where you leave off, but that doesn't matter to me so much. So actually, I would like you just to write down, what is this high point? What is the scene that you're writing driving toward? What is it that you want the reader to know, to come away from? Don't spend too much time thinking about it. Take another minute. All right, start to wrap up your last words. Sorry, my husband's suddenly vacuuming in the other off in the garage. I hope you can't hear it. Who would like to share what they wrote down? Anyone?
I'll
David?
I'm not going to read anything now. Just gonna
That's fine. Just tell us.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, I guess the scene I talked about before, with the sand and all that, I realized that has to be from the translator's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So he has to be imagining himself following in the footsteps of Marty's beloved. Anyways, as a result of that, his epiphany is that that in order to have longing, a memory has to be true, because if we forget, or if we learn that a memory is false, all of a sudden the longing falls away.
Yeah.
So that's how he comes to realize that, and then that's what prompts him to translate the letters a second time, to find in the memories and the letters of Marty and her beloved the true memories they shared between them, which then reinforces their longing to be together again, which brings the translator's sister out of twice time. And then you all know the rest.
And then they yearn and yearn and yearn.
That's right.
Excellent. Thanks. Who else would like to share? Sochi and then Nancy.
So I know we talk sometimes you talk about, so we have the protagonist. So I feel like the family, her family, they're making all these wrong choices with, putting their business, and above their, ethics. And so I feel like in this scene, just hints that perhaps they can learn and grow and be like their daughter and fight against this.
What about her? What does she learn or gain?
I think she learns that even though she's always been at odds with her family and she's always been the black sheep, but she learns that she can find the good in them.
Okay. Yeah. Especially if she's had a long history of pushing them away.
Just, being at odds with them.
Good. Yeah. So sometimes your epiphany can be a positive. It's not always negative. It can be positive as well. All right, Nancy.
Well, I just thought you wanted to point to see. So all I said, really the point of that little section that I wrote was just sort of a mini scene, was that Gabby finally takes a stand with Paul. I mean, that was step one.
Yeah. And that may be the high point of the scene, that might be it, where she's had enough. You might have, when you actually sit down to write the whole scene, it might go on a little longer. And so it could be the turning point for her where she's done. Yeah. Good.
It's the beginning of the turning point.
The beginning of the turning point. The point before the point. Yes.
One point before the next point. Yeah.
Who would like to go next?
I'll go.
Janneke?
So Jakob continues to defend himself against Poppy, his father, for the very first time. It's a much stronger rebellion, and he has all kinds of awarenesses. He knows Poppy can't punish him, and more important, he and Poppy both know that Jakob is the bolder one, less afraid, yet careful. And even Poppy knowing that his criticism of Jakob doesn't entirely fit. It's very bittersweet.
Yeah.
And so then it leads to some different actions on Jakob's part.
Good. Excellent. All right, Susan.
Okay, well, this is a mystery. So the high point is my detective realizing that this woman was killed in the same way as the first victim, and that it's possible that she's wrong about who the killer is, because the son she thinks might be the killer doesn't seem all that concerned.
Good. Excellent. All right, I think we're just gonna finish up with scene endings and then we'll get on to Sochi. So I think I kind of already said all this, but when it's time to end your scenes, you don't want to tie them up too neatly, tidily. I'm a fan of the cliffhanger ending when possible, just meaning that you leave something in the middle of resolution. It doesn't mean that they're literally like have to be, dangling out of a burning car or anything that dramatic. It's just the reader you've left us a little unsatisfied. And there are occasional scenes where you are going to resolve the current scene goal. And this might happen after you might have had like a big action or something dramatic. And then, there is a resolution where at the end of that scene, your character is like, I'm leaving you, Paul, which is actually great because even though that would be a resolution, it would still leave something to be dealt with in the next scene. So the idea is that you leave something that the next scene has to fulfill or a later scene has to fulfill. And it's one part to keep the reader's interest, and it's one part to keep something for the character to do in the next scene. There are going to be maybe 1 or 2 or 3 places in your book where you have a scene that ends very conclusively, meaning everything's wrapped up in a neat bow, and it will come after something dramatic, something intense, and then toward the end of the book when you do actually wrap things up because it's got to be done. So we won't do this exercise. Here's a couple of examples. Cliffhanger ending. This is from a book series. It's called City of Mirrors. It's the 3rd in a series by Justin Cronin called the Passage series. Really excellent. They're like literary vampire apocalyptic novels, but that makes it sound really cheesy. They're not cheesy at all. Very well done. So in this one, the character, this is how the scene ends. There's this chaos that takes place, people shoving and crying, women screaming, babies crying. Caleb smells gasoline. And then at the last sentence is, Caleb took a position at the closest window, pointed his rifle into the darkness, and began to fire. So all we know is that he's taken up weapons against this incoming whatever it is. That's where the scene leaves us. So then of course we're going to have to keep reading because we want to make sure everyone that we love comes out alive. I call this a philosophical ending. It's to show you in contrast what an ending that's not quite as dramatic, how it can still leave you wanting more and unresolving things. And this is from a book called The Girls, which is kind of a fictional exploration of the Manson family. And, the Manson family had these young women who would kind of go out and solicit other young women to be part of the group, the family. And so this woman, the narrator, gets drawn into this sort of group of girls. And she's talking about how her life has changed since she met this one particular girl in particular. And she's saying, I'd catch myself eating an apple, and even the wet swallow of apple could incite gratitude in me. The arrangement of oak leaves overhead, condensing with a hothouse clarity, clues to a riddle I hadn't known you could try to solve. So this whole passage is her sort of like, her life is already changed and different, and she wants to know this woman more. It's not action, there's nothing major happening, but it leaves us wanting a little bit. We want to know what's going to happen now. So 2 different kinds of endings, and this would be the exercise we could do, but I want to move on to Sochi. So just ask yourself some questions when you get to the end of a scene. How do you end the scene but still keep the reader interested? What can you continue to withhold? What action can you suspend or stop in the middle of? What information is yet to be revealed that can be left dangling? And is there a way you can leave your protagonist in a state of discomfort or uncertainty at the end of this scene? And these are some things to consider. Once we're done completely with next week, I'll send this entire set of slides to you. And it's like, this is the set of slides I use for when I teach this as an entire day long or weekend long workshop. So it's like, I think it might be 80 or 90 slides. So it's a lot. And it, you have the book. So, but if you want to see what we've gone through. All right, so we're going to